And then comes 1940, 41, invasion of Poland, and the Jewish people were tremendously affected by it, by the turn of events that was from different types of laws that were directed against the Jews. In that chaos, the Jewish people maintained some kind of sanity with the terrible conditions they had, even though minyanim were not permitted, public gatherings, Shabbat, Kippur. With all of that, they had halachic issues that came up. And what we're going to see is how they dealt with a very, this is the tip of the iceberg of how they dealt with it, who dealt with it, how old was the person who dealt with it. You see, when he was born, mostly talking about one particular person, Rabbi Ashri, who writes from a responsa from Mima Makim, from the depth. And he was thrown into this chaotic situation and had to come up with fantastic responsa to deal with timely issues in a very short time. One example that comes to mind in Ghetto Kovna, there was a selection, and the Jewish people, whoever it is that went on the trains to be exterminated, displaced at first to the east and then exterminated. One Jewish person screams to the other person, Rabbi Yaakov, the chickens, it's Abba L'chaim, the chickens, make sure that they're fed. It's like shocking where his priorities were, the chickens. You know where you're going? The chickens. There was another story there about somebody who was in the hospital in Kovna, and the question came up that he was an amputee, or his leg was amputated by the doctors, and it was a policy, a hospital policy, that whoever was in that hospital and died in the hospital, every one of their belongings was burnt because of contamination or whatever reason. And Rabbi Ashri was faced with the question by somebody that this man had asked him for a pair of tefillin. He wants to put on tefillin. And Rabbi Ashri was told, you know what happens at the hospital. If he dies or they move him, every one of their belongings are burnt. He goes through an extensive 4-page response. What would happen with the tefillin? Are you allowed to do the tefillin? You're not allowed to give them the tefillin. Knowing that they're going to burn it, can you take out a mezuzah? You know, when you're switching a house, can you take, because maybe, and their answer is you can't.
You can't.
You cannot. But Rav Ashri said,
if you know they're going to be burnt?
Yes. He's going to use it for as long as he's going to use it, and then they're going to be desecrated. So what are we going to do? And Rav Ashri said the classic answer: Min hashamayim yirachamu. God will help. It's a weird answer, but this answer is found Avodah Zarah, Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, about 2/3 of the way down of the blood, when Rabbi Akiva asked Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma about teaching with the Sefer Torah, and Rabbi Hananiah ben Tradion was going around teaching with the Sefer Torah. Rabbi Akiva was teaching, and he said, "But you're funny. It's like standing on the banks of the river, and the fish are going back and forth, and a fox comes in and says, why don't you guys come up here? You don't have to worry about the fishermen. Why are you running around? So what are you talking about? In our existence we are afraid. Going up to earth, we're going to die for sure. So I'm trying to do whatever I can. So I'll be surprised if they're not going to kill you. Who knows, with your ideas. So he said to Rabbi Hananiah ben Tadion the same question. They're going to wrap you with a Sefer Torah and they're going to kill you. So Rabbi Hananiah ben Tadion answered, Min ha-shamayim yirachamu. They'll have mercy on us from Shamayim. And that's Hashem, it'll be fine. Everything is against you and you're saying it'll be fine. This is a Emuna answer. Mm-hmm. This is the way it's going to be. So Rav Ashri brings it up and says, well, what is he going to do? Min ha-shamayim yirachamu, it'll be fine. Lo and behold, about a month later, the person died. And as you can imagine, the knuckles are white. What happened to the tefillin? He died, they buried him. But what are going to be? What's going to happen with the tefillin? A few days later, somebody shows up with a tefillin to Rabbi Ashri and he tells him, the man knew he was dying, and he said, make sure that Rabbi Ashri gets that pair of tefillin. So he said, Min ha-shamayim yirachamu is an answer. That's it. So, here, rabbis and Jewish scholars are fascinated by the almost unattainable levels to which Holocaust rabbis reached in order to respond to the various Halacha inquiries presented to them. The depth and sensitivity with which the rabbi dealt with these questions are awe-inspiring. One cannot even begin to fathom the difficulties and intricacies of giving a Pesach Halacha. The process of analyzing complex situations is so difficult that only people gifted with a keen sense of logic and deep understanding can approach an issue, examine it, and consider all the factors and opinions previously raised on this subject. This is what is meant by the words of Yeshayahu HaNavi, Et mi yoreh de'ah, ve'et mi yavin shemuah. Who will give an opinion, and who will understand what was heard? And who will understand what was heard? Et mi yoreh de'ah, ve'et mi yavin shemuah. Who will understand what was, what opinion you're going to give, and who is going to understand the nuance and implication? A classic story of that is somebody went into Reb Chaim the Netziv, I think it was, Erev Pesach, and he asked the rabbi, yes, Reb Chaim, can I make arba kosot on milk? So the Rebbe listened for about 10 seconds, thought about it, went into his wife in the kitchen and said to her, can you prepare a meal for Seder, put it in a box and give it to the man? So Reb Chaim, so the wife did. She put it in the box, the wine and the meat and the matzahs and the lettuce, whatever, and he gives it to the man. The man leaves, and his wife asked him, Reb Chaim, what was that all about? I heard the question, and I heard the answer, it had nothing to do with the answer. So he tells her, that was not the question. The question was, I don't have wine. And if he doesn't have wine, he wants to use milk. And if he's using milk, he can use meat. And you have to have wine and meat tonight. And it doesn't work. That's the understanding of his question. So he continues, certainly applies to the dangers, when the dangers are imminent, and the effect of such a Pesach have far-reaching ramifications. You're going to give him a Pesach, what does it mean in the long term? Ezu chacham haroeh et hanolad. You have to see further You have to have a minyan. No, you don't have to have a minyan. Do you have to put on, can you eat on Yom Kippur? The answer is no. Can you eat on Yom Kippur when it's Pikuach Nefesh? The answer is yes. Can you eat on Yom Kippur in the morning when it's not Pikuach Nefesh, when it'll be Pikuach Nefesh at 2 o'clock? Because you're not going to last it. They used to work them so hard. So those are the types of questions. The scholars and illustrious Rabbanim and Dayanim during the period of Churban Europa went to great length to uphold the dictates of our venerated poskim and did abide by the dictum of V'chai Bahem. You have to live with them, not just you have to do it regardless. To live through the impossible, to think clearly in the face of uncertainty, to settle a person's mind in a most unsettling situation. They were able to live under the threat of the sword and present a pointed and clear decision. This presentation attempts to give you a microscopic view, as we said, of contemporary challenges. The devastation is everywhere. Death is a daily occurrence. The questions are extraordinary and timely responses are critical. Rabbi Ephraim Ashri Zatzal of Ghetto Kovna was one of these giants. He wrote extensively on the issues of the time. The presentation will deal with several responsa he wrote during the horrific era of Churban Europa. Here, we can do it in English, in Hebrew, and then in English, or just go straight to the English. And then, one of the most crucial questions is having to do with saving a life, or killing somebody to save yourself, or being in a situation where he should be killed, and you going to be. So the Gemara says, who says your blood is redder? Perhaps the other person's blood is redder. What makes you think that you're better than him? So and then the Gemara says, even as one who came to Rabbi and said to him, the governor of my town has ordered me, go and kill so-and-so. If not, I will kill you. He, Rabbi, answered to him, let him rather kill you than you should commit murder. Because who said that your blood is redder than the other guy? Mapitom, or what would be, all right? And then when Avdimi came from Babylonia, Babel, he said, this was taught only if there is no royal decree. Now, when does this apply? But if there was a royal decree, one must incur martyrdom rather than transgress even a minor precept. When there is a royal decree, that means the time of Shemad. Now we know that we have to give our lives for the 3 cardinal sins: murder, adultery, and idolatry. What about Shabbat? What about mezuzah? What about tefillin? If you're going to put on tefillin, I'm going to kill you. So you don't put on tefillin, because that's what you have to do. If you're not going to eat Yom Kippur, I'm going to kill you. So then you don't eat. But this applies in private, in situations where it's essential. Somebody's sick, or there's a situation, a private situation. But if it's a public situation that Jewish people are pointed out, are singled out to do something, it's called time of Shemad. All Jews have to do this, even on a shoelace. You have to wear a shoelace of this color because you're Jewish. Otherwise, I'll kill you. And if this was done in front of 10 people, then it means that there is a special decree pointed out directed to Jews, then you have to give your life for that. What is a minor precept? He said, even the change one shoe strap. How many is it in public? Now, the Kiddush Hashem means that you have to do it in public. What's public? 10,000 people, whole sorts of, no, 10. Because it says, and I shall sanctify my name amongst the Jewish people, and the minimum quorum for that is 10 people. Then we have Rabbi Ashri, Ephraim Ashri of Kovna, 1940, was born in 1914, died in New York in 2003. So if you figure that he was born in 1914, it makes him 1924, 10 years old, 1934, 20 years old, 1932 makes him 28 years old. The depth of thinking this man had, he went into the shoes of another rabbi, I think Rabbi Shapiro, I think it was his name, and the understanding he had is just fantastic. That's one of the Sharblat, one of his main pages of one of his books. He wrote a whole series of that. And then there is a question here that comes up, and the question is, the title is Crying and Writing. The question is, a Kohen who was forced a Kohen who was forced a Kohen who was forced to convert to Christianity, whatever, other religion. And he ran away, he regretted, and he went back to his people. Is he permitted to be counted as a minyan and be given Kohen for Duchen or first minyan aliyah? And he describes it. In the month of Nisan, the 28th day of Nisan, the Nazis arrived in Lithuania. As soon as their feet stepped on the soil, they began their systematic murder and annihilation of the Jewish people as they poured through their wrath mercilessly, destroying every good part of Hashem's vineyard, killing without mercy babies, toddlers, men, women, young and old, scholars and laymen. On everyone came down was the axe brought down to kill and lose in every kind of horrific torture and death to the body and soul, starvation and captivity. This is translated from Hebrew practically verbatim, so it doesn't flow as well. And here comes a story. Among the first casualties were a man and a woman who were murdered in one of those days by those wicked and cursed people, Yimach Shemam. And their only beloved son was the sole survivor. The Gentile maid succeeded in hiding and saving him from the cruel murderers, and the boy, 17 years old, was embittered by the tragedy that befell his parents and family. Feeling as a tree in the desert, he was very concerned that the Gentile maiden eventually was going to turn him in. Many days passed, the maid could no longer hide him, and she thought that if she's going to be found out, she'll be killed. So what she did, she went to the local priest and told him, what are we going to do? So we'll take him, so we'll baptize him, and he'll save at least my body. He might have meant well, but the idea was very difficult. He was, and she went, and he took him and sprinkled him with the defiled waters. That's how he would change his ancient religion. And the priest agreed and did as she wished. the young man became completely assimilated among the Gentiles to the point that even they could not recognize his Jewish origin. No one neither embarrassed nor hurt him in any way. He worked among them and could have remained among them peacefully and securely. The young man was restless. In his mind, he kept returning to the dreadful day of his parents, when his parents were brutally murdered in front of his eyes. His soul was troubled, and he could no longer savor the taste of food or drink. The nights became restless, and life became worthless. How could he continue? It tortured him. It worked on him. One day, he mustered up his courage and left the place. He decided to come and live among his afflicted brethren in Kovna and tie his fate with theirs. He was fully prepared to share their pain and, if need be, even come to the gates of death with them. It was evident that the young man had regretted his earlier decision to be among the non-Jews and part of their nation. It was at this point that I was asked if this man, born a Kohen, can be counted for a minyan and honored with the first aliyah and go on to the nuchen. He went somewhere else. Then Rabbi goes through a long dissertation. The premise of that story, it's a long story, that the Kohanim defiled their position and they're no longer permitted to perform his priestly duties. It was a Beit Mikdash somewhere else, and the Torah says, and the Tanakh says, that they can eat some of their stuff, but they cannot perform because they went somewhere that they shouldn't. After long deliberation, with a 7-page presentation deliberation of opinions ranging from Gemara, the Geonim, he brings Rav Haigaon and Sheiltot, Magen Avraham, Tu, and many others. Rav Ashri gave the psak to the young man that is permitted to restore his kilna. Believe it or not. Because he did it, that he was anus. He was forced to do it. So, by anus is a different story. In 1944, when the ghetto was liquidated, the young man shared the fate of the rest of the people. He was killed. And that's what he said. I'm ready to share the fate with them. That's what happened. Then we have a very interesting question. Somebody who was going to be executed for the reason of being Jewish, that's called to die for martyrdom, Lamut al Kiddush Hashem. Dying on Kiddush Hashem, is it a mitzvah? Obviously it is. V'nikdashti v'toch bnei Yisrael, it is a mitzvah to give you life. Does it require a bracha? Like everything else, you have a mitzvah, you make a bracha. Nosach birkat Kiddush Hashem. Do you have to make a blessing before giving your life away for Kiddush Hashem? Rav Ashri recalls with deep sadness the date, Yom Chet of Mar Cheshvan Tafshin Bet, 1942. Wednesday, maybe it was 41. That time, could be it was 42. There he goes. October 1941, it was called the Black Day. And he said, I'm crying, my head, he's quoting a pasuk from Yirmiyahu. My head is water and I'm crying in tears, etc. On the terrible black day of Cheshvan, 5702, when innocent people were taken by the merciless enemy. In that place, they call it Democratic Plaza. It was the Democratic Plaza, was gathered Kovna's Jewish population, young and old, sick and frail, 30,000 people. Suddenly, a man, Rabbi Hashem Yikom Damo, who fled the Warsaw ghetto to find refuge in Kovna, and that was the nature of things, but from one to bad to worse and to even worse, approached me and asked What is the proper blessing of Kiddush Hashem? Rabbi is 28, 29 years old. 1941, or maybe 30 by then. Is it Lekadesh et Hashem? Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Lekadesh et Hashem, like Likboa mezuzah? Or Asher Yisrael Totav et Shivanu al Kiddush Hashem, al Netilat Yadayim. What's the problem? This is what people are worried. They're going to be shot. He's worried. What's the proper? Rabbi writes a long dissertation, again quoting sources and citing precedents from many different similar situations. Rabbi recalls the holy Rav Asher Frankfurter, Hashem Yikam Damo, who did the long bracha, concluding with the words, Baruch atah Hashem, Mekadesh Shimcha Barabim. He who sanctifies your name in public. After which, the person must recite the Shema and prepare for the final moment. Later he quotes the Shelah, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher k'yitzad zotav v'tzivanu lekadesh shemo barabim. Different than what he had thought. Soon after my instructions, Rabbi Eliyahu went around to the people and told them the proper nusach. He went around, this is what's going to happen, and you tell them, in case they might need to do the inevitable. And interestingly enough, in Spain, before they used to go to the Auto da Fe, when they used to be burnt at the stake, their sidurim, in the back of the sidur, had Hatfilah l'nisrafim, prayer for those who are going to be burnt. Everybody knew it by heart. In case, it's like a way of life. Like you have to know Tfilah Sadeh, you have to know Shema, you have to know this. He later returned to me and told me that Rabbi Chana Wasserman, Hashem Yikam Damo, who was already killed by then, had taught his son, Rabbi Ephraim, also to do the same, as the Holy Chafetz Chaim, who said to do the same. This is the bracha he made. That's interesting proof that this young rabbi had referred to earlier ones. He was killed, Rabbi Wasserman, he passed away, 1936. Rabbi Wasserman was giving a dav for a shir in Nida, and at 4 o'clock in the morning, the Germans stormed into his house, and they saw this awesome-looking person. He was in the middle of a shir, and the story goes that one of the soldiers said to the other one, "Das ist ein heiliger Mensch." Looks like a holy man. Says, "Wir haben Ordnung." We have an order to fill. They don't get caught up with this holy stuff. They made him walk to the 9th fortress, and as they were going, the whole city followed. They knew that something's happening. His son was there, Ephraim was killed with him, and I think Ab Simcha was there too, somehow survived. And before he was executed, he said, and it appears in the beginning of Kovetz Shurim, a sefer that was written from his Shurim, and he said, in Shemayim, they must think we are very special people. So, and they chose us to be the sacrifice, the sacrifice for our brethren in America. So let us not think anything bad, so we will defile the korban. And we have to have the proper thinking, so the korban will be right. And people have recorded this and wrote it down, and he was shot shortly after. Ano avdo de kudsha brichu. I am the servant, we say this when we open the Heichal, Har Kodesh on Shabbos Yom Tov daily, and Mondays and Thursdays. And I am the servant of Hashem, clearly stated. And the question that came up is when you say Birkos HaShachar, what do you say? Shelo asani shivcha in the morning. I did not make me a maiden. Men say, who did not make me a slave. And Rav Ashri was asked, we are under such duress. We don't have free will. How can we say you did not? It's like I'm saying something that is not correct to say. Can one say Shelo asani evidin Birkos HaShachar when we are experiencing the exact opposite? We are enslaved every minute of the day. Answer: this bracha was composed not for the physical bondage, but rather to indicate the spiritual freedom. How much more now that we must say the blessing to show the Gentiles that though we are in captivity and they can do to us as they wish, we do not feel slaves, rather as free men who are in captivity, and our salvation is near. We have hope. Slaves don't have hope. That's their fate. We have hope, and we should say the bracha. It's like an understanding of it. It's like putting yourself outside of the picture and looking at yourself at these people. They might be freed one day. There's a story about the Blujever, Besol Shapira. He died a few years ago. He was in Auschwitz when he was in his 50s. He died. He was 104 in Brooklyn, and they somehow managed in unusual ways to daven and to do different things. And came Hanukkah, 1943 or somewhere there, and they managed some oil and put in the potatoes, and somehow they managed a wick or something. And he was standing there all whispering because they couldn't hear the noises. And he said, Bui Chatu Shechion. No, he said, Ladlik Ner Hanukkah. Everybody whispered Amen. And then the other one, She'asani Sim Lavotenu Bayamim Bayim Bazman Hazeh. And then he stops. First night you have to do 3 blessings. Shechianu. Shechianu V'kivanu V'giyanu Lazman Hazeh. That he gave us the life to come to this time. Again, it doesn't fit. So he looks at everybody. There were like 15 people around, or whatever the number, a fairly large crowd. He looks around, and then he said, and he lights the candles. And as the candles were burning, they asked him, how could you make this blessing? Shechianu? That we were so fortunate to come to this time? So we are. We're fortunate to be able, even here, to light this candle. So it goes along the same line of defying, and we have our freedom. Next one. Eretz al techasid amam, v'al yehi makom lezakatam. Earth, do not cover their blood, and there shall be no place for their scream. When the blood is covered and the scream is accepted somewhere in the universe, then you forget about it. It's filed. Save, click, file, finished. When there is no room for that scream and the earth did not absorb the blood, it's constantly here. It's constantly roaming around. And this pasuk comes from somewhere else, but he said, Likdoshim asher ba'aretz ema, for the holy ones who are in the earth. This is dedicated to the understanding of the kind of pressures and the kind of things that they went through, a bit of which we can take home with us and understand that as bad as it is, it could be worse. And they even said that. Shechianu, and being a slave, it's not being a slave. You have the freedom to do, the freedom to think, and the freedom to worship Hashem and be Mekadesh Hashem. The purpose of life is to sanctify, not lamut al kiddush Hashem, not to die on the sanctification of God. It's to live for the sanctification of Hashem's name.